just below us there is the city of Chattanooga, Tennessee. Now, the city of Chattanooga, it would see about 3 months of conflict throughout the period of 1863. Now, 1863 in the Civil War, the war broke out in 1861. It was a very confusing time by the time 1863 rolls around. It's midway through the war. It's already the most violent conflict America's ever been involved in, and it's not even close to being over. But something we do see in 1863 is a large shift in momentum. Now, the Confederates had been coming off of their victories initially at Fredericksburg and then at Chancellorsville. However, the Battle of Gettysburg occurs July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, 1863, and that sees a massive changeover for Union morale and Union momentum in the North. The Army of the Potomac throws the Army of Northern Virginia out of the North, really where they're never going to return northward in force again after that point. At that same exact time, out to our west from where we are, General Ulysses S. Grant is sieging the city of Vicksburg, Mississippi. He has been for over a month, and that's going to come to an end on July 4th, 1863, one day after the Battle of Gettysburg, and that's going to result in 25,000 Confederate soldiers surrendering, as well as gaining control of the entire Mississippi River, effectively splitting the Confederacy in two. So both sides are going to look towards their second largest forces, which is going to be the Confederate Army of Tennessee, which sits, by the time this campaign is coming to a head, just about 68,000 men strong, and is commanded by General Braxton Bragg. Then on the other side, you have the Union Army of the Cumberland, commanded by General William Rosecrans, and they're going to sit just about 60,000 men strong. Now, Rosecrans had been advancing on Chattanooga, considering that it is the gateway into the Confederacy. If the Union wants to attack the Deep South, attack the industrial heartland that is Georgia, they have to start with Chattanooga. There are 4 major rail lines that converge in the city. There's one just below us there, following along the freeway. And down there, those 4 rail lines are going to be the same rail gauge, which means you don't have to deboard one train and reboard another to move supplies through the city. The 2 other most important cities in the Confederacy are going to be Richmond and Atlanta, and Chattanooga is the one that connects them. So the Union's going to be looking to siege the city, and the Confederates cannot afford to lose it. Abraham Lincoln will even say himself, taking Chattanooga is as important as taking Richmond. Now, Bragg is finding himself with an ultimatum when he finds himself in the city in early September of 1863. General Rosecrans is currently flanking around him to the south, crossing over Lookout Mountain, spreading out his 3 corps by a distance of over 27 miles. Now, Bragg is faced with this decision of either staying and to defend this important Confederate supply hub, defend the vital city of Chattanooga, but risk being put under siege, being trapped from the south, being cut off from escape routes and supply routes, which could possibly result in the destruction of his entire force. Or fighting a decisive battle against the Union Army, destroying the Army of the Cumberland, and returning to the city uncontested. Now, both sides come with their up and down, but Bragg's going to opt for the latter, and he's going to withdraw the Confederate Army from Chattanooga on September 8th, 1863, and initial elements of the Army of the Cumberland are going to occupy the city on September 9th, only one day later. Now, Rosecrans is going to be under the impression Bragg's retreating all the way south to Atlanta, and he's going to continue his push southward over Lookout Mountain. However, he will quickly realize that is not the case when Bragg tries to trap him in a place called Macklemore's Cove down the mountain from here. And Rosecrans is going to decide to consolidate his forces at a place called Lee and Gordon's Mills. And just north of that, along the Chickamauga Creek, is where the battle will erupt, the Battle of Chickamauga. Now, that battle is fought with Bragg's army, the goal of trying to flank around north of the Union Army, get between the Union Army and the city, cut off their escape route, cut off their supply route, drive them south with their backs up against the mountain where they would have nowhere to run. However, the Battle of Chickamauga is fought September 18th, 19th, and 20th, 1863, and it will become the second largest, second bloodiest battle of the American Civil War. Over 34,000 casualties would be gathered across those 3 days, and that happens just south of where we're standing here on the mountain. Now, the Battle of Chickamauga is a Confederate victory. However, it's a very hollow victory. Bragg fails in his goal to drive the Union southward, and they end up being allowed to escape back north to Chattanooga thanks to actions that are done by General George Thomas, who will later go on to become known as the Rock of Chickamauga. Now, the Union Army retreats from the Chickamauga battlefield. The Confederates are left in position of the battlefield. However, they have gained no city, they have gained no supply hub, they have gained no fort. There's nothing but farmland out there. So both sides know another battle is yet to come for control of the city below us. Now, the Union will occupy the city, and Bragg's plan, he cannot attack the city head on. It would be a suicidal move for any army to attempt, so he's going to set up a siege line, attempt to starve out the Union forces. And this siege line is going to be over 12 miles long. This kind of dark ridge that stretches off just to the east of the city is going to be Missionary Ridge. Missionary Ridge stretches all the way up to the Tennessee River, and that's where the Bragg siege line is going to start, at the very northern end of Missionary Ridge. Continue south just about to where the Rossville Gap is, where the freeway disappears through the ridge today, and comes across this Chattanooga Valley below us, up to the point of this mountain here, down across the shoulders of the mountain, and down into Lookout Valley below on this west side of the mountain. Now, the siege line, again, is going to be 12 miles long. It's going to be very stretched thin for Bragg's already diminished Confederate force, and the supplies that are reaching these men on the mountain are very little. The supply depot for the Confederate Army is way further to the east, just beyond Missionary Ridge, at a place called Catoosa Station, and it takes a lot of effort to get those supplies over to these men on this mountain. So Bragg's siege line is already a little weak. However, it is effective in cutting off the Union supply in the city. These guns that we see up here on the mountain represent Confederate artillery positions that were here, and they were meant to silence the supply routes. The Tennessee River, the freeway down there, which would have been a wagon road at the time of the war, and the railroad down there would all be silenced by these guns up here on the mountain. The city itself is about 4 miles away, so no guns at that time could hit the city. About 2.5 to 3 miles is the best you're going to get out of any guns of that time. Now, but the Union secondary supply line will be forced to come along the base of Walden's Ridge, and Walden's Ridge is out there, kind of stretching off into the haze just beyond Lookout Mountain, and that secondary Union supply line is going to be cut off very quickly by Confederate skirmishers that are placed out there to target Union horses and mules, cut off their motive of moving the wagons, and then the Union is going to be forced to bring their supplies over the top of Walden's Ridge. Now, through the period of October, the month of October, it's rained almost every single day. These horses and mules are going through about belly-high mud, up a ridge and down again, and many animals will die trying to bring the Union Army their supplies and be very heavily weakened by this strain they are enduring going over the mountain. So the supplies reaching the city are only about half. The wagons can only carry about half their load, and Rosecrans places the soldiers in the city on quarter rations. So already the rare occurrence of them receiving goods are going to be cut down by half, and all the way down to even a quarter. Now, the men in the city quickly begin to starve. The morale begins to plummet. Now, in mid-October, just about the time of October 19th, 1863, General Ulysses S. Grant is going to be promoted to overall command of the armies in the area, the Department of the Mississippi area down here in the south. And he's going to arrive in the city of Chattanooga, and his first action is going to be firing General Rosecrans for the debacle at Chickamauga, and he's going to promote General George Thomas to command of the Army of the Cumberland. Now, headed his way is 20,000 men from the Army of the Potomac up north, being sent down over a period of 7 days over railroad, one of the most ambitious railroad operations in the history of this war, and probably still seen as one today. And these men are going to be sent down all the way down to Bridgeport, Alabama, which is under Union control, and begin marching northward up the Cumberland Plateau, arriving in Lookout Valley. And Grant is going to use that to his advantage. He has been given a plan that to open a Union supply line. He'll say the only thing I could not figure out is why Rosecrans refused to implement it. And what this is going to be is he's going to get roughly 3,000 Union soldiers down on roughly 60 pontoon boats that are going to launch from where those blue warehouses are down there today on the Tennessee River. And they're going to sail down the river over the cover of night so these guns up here can't see them. And they're going to arrive at a place called Brown's Ferry. Now, we can't see Brown's Ferry from here, but it's just beyond the trees where the Tennessee River turns northward. And the Brown's Ferry area is where these Union soldiers are going to get off the pontoon boats, fight back the 14th and 15th Alabama, which had just charged Little Round Top against Colonel Chamberlain only a few months before this. And they're going to fight them off and be able to set up a pontoon boat where the ferry crosses, or pontoon bridge, and another one just across the other side of Moccasin Bend, again where those blue warehouses are today. Now, they are going to be meeting General Hooker's men who are arriving north up Lookout Valley. And the men in the valley are going to fight in an action against the Confederate forces off the left side of the mountain on October 27th, the nighttime of October 27th into the early morning hours of October 28th. This is an entirely night engagement, and it will become known as the Battle of Wauhatchie. And this is going to result in no per se Union victory or Confederate loss. However, it's going to result in the Confederate forces pulling themselves back across Lookout Creek, which lays in the Lookout Valley, to the base of this mountain and setting up their defensive positions there, and allowing the Union Army to establish themselves across a series of hills in Lookout Valley. And now Union supplies are able to travel up the same way Hooker's army did from Bridgeport all the way up to the base of Walden's Ridge, across Brown's Ferry, which is out of range of these guns up here on the mountain, across Moccasin Bend and into the city. So the Union begin getting their full supply, and that is what's known as the Cracker Line. That's what Grant would call it, the Cracker Line. And now the Union morale begins slowly building. However, Grant needs to wait just about another month, because he knows also headed his way is 20,000 more men from General William Tecumseh Sherman's Army of the Tennessee, marching their way over from Mississippi. Now, these men are going to take nearly a month to make their way over to this area. And it's that period from October to November 20th that Bragg is faced with a decision. He knows Sherman's forces are advancing on northward. He does not know where their end goal is. He has to take a gamble. He has to guess if they're going to stay here to aid Grant's forces in the city of Chattanooga, or continue northward to fight with General Burnside and the Union Army of the Ohio in the Knoxville campaign. And Bragg's going to take a gamble here, so he's going to pull roughly 14,000 men under command of General James Longstreet, who had been stationed on this mountain, and he's going to pull them off this mountain down all the way to the Catoosa station, where he's going to board them on trains and send them northward. This is nearing the time of November 20th. And he's going to send them northward in hope of preventing any disasters happening around the city of Knoxville. General Sherman's army hooking up with General Burnside's army would be very devastating for the Confederate forces. So Bragg hopes that that will aid in this effort. However, he has just lost his bet. General Sherman arrives in the city, and he has no plans on leaving. This leaves Grant's strength by the time of November 20th in the city at 80,000 men. General Bragg's army, with the loss of Longstreet's men, now sits at a strength of nearly only 40,000. He's outnumbered almost entirely 2-1. Now, Sherman's forces are going to continue marching northward once they arrive, and they're going to continue along the base of Walden's Ridge, shrouded by the small hills that stretch off north along the base of the ridge, so that the Confederates up here on the mountain and across on Missionary Ridge can't see where he's going. They're still left uncertain if he's headed to Knoxville or not. However, this is all parts of Grant's plan, so when Sherman disappears behind the hills, he will then reappear at the northern end of Missionary Ridge and begin an attack. Now, at this time, Grant knows it's time to get something started. So before he wants Sherman's forces to attack, he decides to almost probe the Confederate position. Try to make a small attack, a small advance, see how the Confederates react. If they retreat, if they counterattack, he does not know. So what he sets his sights on is Orchard Knob. Now, it's a little hazy today, but out there's the Chattanooga National Cemetery. It's a plot of grass that's kind of speckled with trees, and it has a dirt road running up the middle of it way out there. And that's going to be the Chattanooga National Cemetery. Orchard Knob will just be a block or two beyond it. Can't see it from the mountain here. The city urbanization has built up too far around it. But in the city of 2,500 people that it was in 1863, Orchard Knob stood 100 foot high above everything else around it. It was only occupied by an advance guard of Confederates, roughly 600 men strong, and Grant is going to order Thomas to take that position on November 23rd, 1863, and Thomas is going to march his troops out, roughly 14,000 men in strength, to Orchard Knob. 600 Confederates try to put up a fight, but there's nothing they can do as no reinforcements are being sent their way, and the knob is very quickly taken. And Grant will use Orchard Knob as his observation post for the actions that are to be fought the next day. Now, Grant's main plan is for Sherman to cross the Tennessee River north, near the north end of Missionary Ridge. And Sherman will begin doing so at 3 in the morning on November 24th. And his forces are going to spend all the morning crossing the Tennessee, getting across, and by mid-afternoon on November 24th, they have finally positioned themselves in force to attack Missionary Ridge. And they're going to go charging up a hill under cannon fire the entire way and reach the top of the hill and find there's no Confederates there. Sherman's forces attack what is called Billy Goat Hill. It's a cap at the end of Missionary Ridge, at the north end. From the ground, it looks like a continuous ridgeline. It looks like a start of that ridgeline. However, once you get up to the top, it's very evident that there is a deep saddle between Billy Goat Hill and where Missionary Ridge begins. They're not actually connected. And there are no Confederates occupying Billy Goat Hill. So Sherman's attack will not go through on the 24th. His men are tired, night is beginning to come, and his attack will have to wait one more day to attack the true Confederate position on Missionary Ridge. However, it is that same day on November 24th as Sherman's trying to get his troops in order on that north end of the Confederate siege line. General Hooker has been asking Grant for nearly a month by this point to attack Lookout Mountain. That's what Hooker's been wanting to do. His troops are still down in Lookout Valley, and he is going to do so on November 24th when Grant gives him permission to assault the mountain. Now, Grant has no hopes for this attack. He does not care if it's a success. He does not care if it's a failure. Lookout Mountain poses no strategic advantage for the Union whatsoever. The Confederate supplies are way off to the east, and that's what Grant's after. If he can deal a decisive blow, it's going to be on the east end of this siege line, not Lookout Mountain. However, he will finally relent to Hooker's request and say, "You're welcome to attack the mountain," in hopes that it'll pull some reinforcements and some attention off of Sherman's troops crossing the river to this side and possibly weaken that Confederate defense for Sherman to attack. Now, General Hooker, he knows that the mountain is shrouded in fog on November 24th. It's an incredibly rainy day. Some days when I'm up here, I can't even see that New York Peace Monument from right where we're standing, because it can be foggy on this mountain. In Lookout Mountain, the battle that will proceed to unfold here will be known as the battle above the clouds, but it's more accurately described as the battle in the clouds. Now, Hooker's going to use this to his advantage, so he's going to split his forces in half. Roughly 7,000 men are going to assault the base of the mountain down in Lookout Valley. Their goal is not to charge up the face of the mountain and attack the Confederate positions, but to attack the base of the mountain, possibly drive some of those Confederates that are at Lookout Creek down across the very base of the mountain back towards Missionary Ridge. Now the other half of Hooker's force, again just about 7,000 men, are going to march just about a mile south down Lookout Valley, climb Lookout Mountain near a place today known as Sunset Rock. And they're going to form a battle line stretching down the slopes of the mountain. This is a common misconception with the Battle of Lookout Mountain. No Union attack went straight up the side. They were not charging up the mountain, they were charging along the mountain. So this battle line is going to form from Sunset Rock straight down into the valley and proceed to charge the Confederate lines that are looking down into the valley. So these Confederates are looking straight down into the valley below in the fog, when all of a sudden 7,000 Union soldiers come charging in on their left out of nowhere. This fighting is very close-handed, almost 50 yards away for most of it. Again, neither side can really see the other in the fog except for the lights of the muskets against the clouds. Now, this Union attack is going to come sweeping along the face of the mountain, and they're very quickly going to drive the Confederates around the point all the way to a place called the Craven's House. Now, the Craven's House is just below us here on the mountain. It's just about 500 feet down from where we're standing, and that's going to be a shelf in the mountain, and that shelf is going to be where the slopes of the mountain continue on. It's important to note also that where we're standing up here, there was no fighting in the Battle of Lookout Mountain. These Confederate cannons up here could not depress their barrels low enough to hit down in the valley, and this Lookout Mountain is capped by about 90 to 100 feet of sheer vertical rock. We call it the rock palisades that cap this mountain. We're on top of them right now, but that results in it's impossible for Union forces to scale those rock walls in enough force to make a battle on the Confederate forces up here on the mountain. So their majority of the fighting is going to happen down at the Craven's House. Now, the Craven's House down there in the valley, or down there on the face of the mountain, that's where the Confederate battle line is going to form. They're going to rally for a defense. They know there's only one road running off the mountain at that time known as the Summertown Road. And they still have many supplies, many cannons, and many men up here on top of the mountain, and they have to get them off. So they're going to attempt their defense here at the Craven's House, and they're going to hold that line for the remainder of the day. No one knows who's won the Battle of Lookout Mountain by the time the sun goes down and the fighting is forced to stop. The next day, on November 25th, Union forces, just sort of one of which being the 8th Kentucky that is being portrayed back there by our wonderful reenactors, they will scale the rock faces and come up to the point of Ox Observatory today, and they will begin waving the American flag off the point of the mountain when they discover that no Confederates remain. The Confederates have escaped down the valley off into Chattanooga Valley and were retreating across the valley all night. Now, once that American flag begins waving off the point, it's said that a loud cheer erupted from the city of Chattanooga. You could hear it up here on the mountain. As some soldiers would write, Goliath had fallen. The imposing force that is Lookout Mountain was now conquered. However, Hooker's men couldn't sit in their victory for long, as they were quickly ordered down off the mountain to pursue the retreating Confederates across Chattanooga Valley toward Missionary Ridge. Now, Grant's new plan, now that Hooker had succeeded in taking the mountain for the 25th, was Sherman's attack is going to resume properly on the right part of Missionary Ridge, and Hooker's forces will go to the south end of the Confederate line near the Rossville Gap on Missionary Ridge. And as Hooker's men are charging northward along the ridge, Sherman's men are going to charge southward along the ridge, and it's going to be a pincer move. Drive that Confederate line off of the ridge. However, Sherman's men begin running into an issue. They are going up against Cleburne's Confederate division. Now, General Cleburne's Confederates are some of the most experienced men in the entire Confederate Army. They're the most veteran soldiers the Confederacy has to offer, and they are not going to give up easily. Sherman's forces are quite literally running up a 600-foot high hill straight at a Confederate battle line, and one Confederate soldier will even write, "We feel that we can kill all they send at us." This is a very difficult position for Sherman's forces to take, and they are going to have a lot of difficulty getting any ground on the north end of Missionary Ridge. So Sherman's attack very quickly stalls out, runs out of momentum. Hooker has run into some issues of his own. The retreating Confederates have burned the bridges across Chattanooga Creek the night before. The rivers have been swollen by the rainfall in the previous months, and he cannot ford the river. So he has to bring up his engineers to begin constructing more bridges to bring his artillery and supplies across. So Hooker's attack on the south end of Missionary Ridge doesn't even begin until early afternoon. And by the time it does, he runs into the same issue of charging up a 600-foot tall hill straight at a Confederate line. And his attack is not also able to gain much ground. So Grant, seemingly exhausted of options by the late afternoon, he has one more. He has one more option, and that's the 47,000 Union soldiers under command of General George Thomas, which had been positioned around the point of Orchard Knob, and he's going to send them forward. He's going to order them to take the Confederate rifle pits at the base of Missionary Ridge. He's never going to explicitly issue any orders for those Union soldiers to take the Confederate battle line on top of the ridge. He has no goal of taking that battle line. He feels as if it's too difficult of a position for any troops to take. So he hopes that this assault on the base of the ridge at those Confederate rifle pits will pull reinforcements from the south and north flanks of the Confederate forces to Thomas's men and weaken those flanks for Sherman and Hooker to gain ground and continue with this pincer move. So he's going to order those men forward. However, when Thomas's men reach those Confederate rifle pits, they are going to look around, realize they're under an intense fire from the Confederates, and they know they can't turn back and go back, and they know they can't stay where they were. So without being ordered to do so by Thomas or any of his subordinate corps commanders, his men will decide to continue charging up the hill on their own will. Now this Union attack is going to charge up Missionary Ridge with so much ferocity, it's going to begin panicking a lot of the Confederate defenders. It's important to note that these men feel that they have something to prove. To the left of them, there are 20,000 men from Sherman's army of the Tennessee, which has just come off the major Union victory at Vicksburg. To the right, they have 20,000 men from the Army of the Potomac, which has just came off of the major Union victory at Gettysburg. And these 47,000 men have just come off the major Union loss at the Battle of Chickamauga. So they have something to prove. They're going to charge up the top of the hill shouting, "Chickamauga, Chickamauga, Chickamauga," as they go. And this assault is going to hit the Confederate defenders so fiercely, many of them won't even have the chance to turn around and fire the cannons, fire their weapons. A lot of Confederate officers are going to express frustration after this battle. They would write that if only our men could turn around and fight, we would hold that position all day. If only they would turn around and fire their weapons, we could hold that line. Now, but these Confederates are panicking, quite literally. There's only 3 roads off of the top of Missionary Ridge. A lot of them have in the back of their mind, what if we don't make it to one of these roads? We're going to be captured. We're going to be put prisoners of war, and many of them would be. Now, as they're going up Missionary Ridge, a story I like to tell is one of that of the 24th Wisconsin. Now, the 24th Wisconsin has a young lieutenant charging up the hill. He sees his color bearer fall mortally wounded in front of him. He will pick up the American flag. He will continue, jump on top of a Confederate work, and begin waving the American flag, shouting, "On Wisconsin." Now, "On Wisconsin," the phrase lives on today as the University of Wisconsin's fight song, "On Wisconsin." However, that one man would win the Medal of Honor for his actions on Missionary Ridge. And that man was one Arthur MacArthur. Now, Arthur MacArthur would go on to have a son named Douglas MacArthur, who would win the Medal of Honor for his actions in World War II. They are one of 2 father and son pairs in the history of this country to win the Medal of Honor. Now, as impressive as Arthur MacArthur's story is, he is just one of 17 men that would win the Medal of Honor on November 25th, charging Missionary Ridge. I use that as a good representation of how fierce, how brave, how violent this Union attack was on this Confederate position. And a result of that is the Confederate line's going to break. It's It's going to break almost simultaneously along the middle as all of these regiments go charging up the hill, and they're going to collapse in the middle. That means very quickly Hooker's men begin gaining their own ground on the south end, begin charging up the hill, and the Confederate left dissolves almost entirely, immediately as well. On the north end, Cleburne's division is still able to hold their ground quite well. However, he realizes very quickly just about three-fourths of the Confederate army has already begun retreating. He cannot hold this position all day. It's futile to hold this position all day. So he withdraws his forces to help defend the Confederate retreat, the supply trains, everything that is retreating to the Catoosa station. And this Confederate retreat will not stop just about until they get to Dalton, Georgia for the winter. And once they're in Georgia, they will continue to retreat the next year. Just a few months after these actions here in Chattanooga, Sherman will begin using the city to build up his forces to begin their march down the railroad that runs from Chattanooga to Atlanta, straight to fight in the Atlanta campaign. Many historians will say that as soon as the Confederates pulled off of Missionary Ridge, as soon as they retreated from Missionary Ridge, the war was lost. It was only a matter of time from that point on. That's why it's known as the death knell of the Confederacy. One of Bragg's staff would even call it as such. And now Sherman's forces are marching on Atlanta from the city. The gateway is open and they're going straight through it. And the city of Atlanta will surrender to Sherman's forces only a year after these actions here in November of 1864. And Sherman will continue on from them on his infamous march to the sea from Atlanta to Savannah, destroying Southern economy, destroying Southern industry, trying to hinder any effort to aid the Army of Northern Virginia, to aid the rest of the Confederacy's war effort. He will succeed by destroying almost the entirety of the state of Georgia between Atlanta and Savannah. Now, he will continue to turn northward, and the men who fought here at Chattanooga will surrender to Sherman's army in North Carolina, 15 days after Robert E. Lee surrenders to Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in 1865, and that'll bring the Civil War to an end. Now, the question of what this war was going to look like had been answered. Over 700,000 Americans have been killed in this conflict. It is the most violent war in American history. It is the most devastating war in American history. No conflict we have ever fought in has come close to the Civil War for Americans. And now the question remains for many of these men, what do we do now? And that question would begin to be answered as many of these men find themselves in position of power. General Rosecrance's chief of staff was one James A. Garfield, who would go on to become the 20th president of the United States. General Wilder of the Lightning Brigade, which fought with distinction at Chickamauga. General Wilder himself will go on to become the mayor of Chattanooga following the war. And many, many of these other men will find themselves in government, staying in the military, positions of power. Grant himself becoming the president, so on. However, these men will realize that something needs to be done to commemorate these actions, commemorate these men who died and why they were fighting. And they would come up with the idea of the National Military Park. And the first National Military Park established in this country is Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Park, which we are now at today. And that will pave the way for many other national military parks to follow shortly after, including Vicksburg, Fredericksburg, Shiloh, Antietam, and Gettysburg. Now, many of the veterans who fought on this ground would come back in later years. They would place the monuments, over 1,500 monuments, markers, and placards you might see at a place like the Chickamauga battlefield. Those are going to be placed by veterans themselves who come back and identify where their actions they were proud of were fought on the land they were fought on. The federal government would place the plaques. You can see some behind us there, but these plaques, the words written on them are going to be written by veterans themselves. So they made it sure that future generations could come back, remember this history, remember the 16,000 men who gave their lives fighting for this area of the country during one of the most pivotal parts of American history. But that will conclude the talk on the Chattanooga campaign. And if you have any questions, anything like that, feel free to let me know. I have a map here if you would like to take a look at it. This is just of all the actions that were fought in the area. Lookout Mountains here where we're standing. Hooker's attack on the 24th. Sherman's initial attack on the 24th. And the final assault on Missionary Ridge on the 25th.